Lance, great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us. Of course, we give you the quick bat phone call when we see this trade involving Edward Cabrera moving over to the Cubs. And I know you know about the prospect return package too. So first off, I wanted to get your thoughts on the whole thing.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. Always good to see you guys. Hope you're well. Happy New Year and everything. It's a fun trade. Cubs finally did something. We've been waiting like 4.5 months, and potentially we were even waiting since last deadline where they didn't do too much. It's really nice to inject a bit of liveliness into the local radio here and have Cub fans be excited about adding a guy that is really electric to this team. I'd say that he's a bit different than a lot of the pitchers the Cubs presently have. If you look in the last couple of years, the Cubs have kind of sought these contact neutralizer, not big bat misser. You know, they had a bunch of four-seam fastball usage last year relative to the league. I believe they were number one in the sport, actually. They prefer this kind of bat miss, limit barrel ability, and they bring Cabrera in here, who is a guy that has insane stuff. His slot fell a little with Miami from 24 to 25. I don't know if it was entirely intentional, but what I do know was intentional was their interest in Miami pushing him to a sinker, which finally allowed him to get in zone enough to pull down his walk rate below 10%. And I think for the most part, we've lifted the tag of he'll never be able to throw strikes, which was persistent with his profile from like the second he got into the sport, where he was running walk rates that were pretty much unsustainable. So he's a really fun arm. I mean, the curveball's sick. They adjusted his slider grip. I think there's room if the Cubs want to go towards like a sweeper and maybe even a cutter. Like, this dude can be a frontline starter, and I think he's incredibly exciting for the Cubs to add to the rotation.
All right, before we get to the prospect package, before we get to like your evaluation of too much, you said electric. Okay, he's got electric stuff. Is it electric compared to the Cubs rotation, which you admittedly just said they're more, they're not quite on that? So does he become the smartest kid in dumb school because everyone else is just kind of going out there and doing their thing? Or is it something that they're getting a guy, when you say electric and exciting and fun, they're getting a guy that has thrown over 100 innings one time? Like, it just feels like, because I'm not even going to shift to who they gave up to get him, but like, is this a sustainable thing? Because if that dropped arm angle is because he got tired from his 134 innings, or is it because like that's actually what's enabling him to get on top of his sinker and make it work? Like, there's so many questions that I have, and I love how you break down the pitching development stuff.
Yeah, this is going to be a long response because you layered in a lot there. I'd say it's electric relative to all pitchers in baseball. We can prove this just through looking at his raw velocity, also his ability to purely spin the ball, the breaking ball shapes he can create at the velocity he throws. So he's the smartest kid. This is the smartest kid at the dumb school, I guess, but he's also like the smartest kid when you then bring him to Stanford, Like, he's not the best stuff in baseball. He's really good. And I think that it's just more, I wouldn't say a shock, but it's just different, I think, for Cubs fans to look at an arm that can strike out 30% of the guys he faces and go, yeah, like, this dude has that level of upside. Now, you layered in something fascinating here. So I poked around a lot on this trade, and the big thing that jumps out to me is how little talk there's been that Cabrera sprained his UCL at the end of last season. And I understand he came back at the end of September, I believe, wasn't through 2 times. But this is something that, from my understanding and talking to people in the league and talking to teams who communicated with the Marlins about Cabrera, this was a hang-up for other teams. I think if you gave these medicals to 30 teams in baseball, I don't entirely know how many of them would have approved them. The Cubs approved them, and I think the Cubs are very sharp on the medical side. So I'm not saying they're incompetent in any respect, but there's a level of risk here they are accepting, right? UCL sprains are tears. A sprain is a tear of a muscle. So it's not incorrect to say he sprained his UCL last season. Does that impact your innings projection going forward for him? I think it has to some extent. So there's risk, I think, on both sides of this deal. The Cubs obviously got comfortable with the level of risk they were accepting with a guy like Edward Cabrera, perhaps because this stuff is so good. They have multiple years of control with him. So this isn't like a ticking time bomb, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, I talked to people in the league who were like kind of surprised that he cleared medicals. And I wouldn't say I'm like concerned in that respect, but it did definitely like piqued my ears when I heard that.
Let me ask you this. Where do you see, this is a quicker question, then I'll get to another one. Where do you see him fitting in the starting rotation? What number slot? Do you see him, 1 or 2? Like, where do you see him at right now for this team?
Yeah, I think he's right in that 2 area, I would say. The interesting thing to see will be how they sequence him early in the year. I don't believe he's a guy with too much cold weather experience. The Cubs have a lot of home games in April. and it's cold in April in Chicago. So I'm wondering whether they almost try to line him up to pitch road games. And maybe this is nothing. Maybe he loves pitching in the cold. I don't entirely know. I've never talked to him. I don't know. But I'm wondering whether they kind of sequence him in a way that doesn't push him as the ace, so to speak. But I think he slots in as like the number 2 guy. Matt Boyd is the innings eater. He just came off one of the best seasons of his career. Feels like he would get perhaps the opening day start, especially with Steele coming back midseason.
That was perfect answer. You answered another one of my questions. But now for the Cubs too as well, do you see any other particular moves coming through, or is this the last one you think? I mean, Kyle Tucker is not there anymore. Do you see anything else coming into fruition for the Cubs this offseason?
I mean, which side are you asking? Are you asking the brain here or the heart? You know what I mean? The heart is absolutely like, yeah, give me Bregman, man. Like, they've been linked to him. I can confirm that. I mean, you don't need me to confirm when Rosenthal has it and others, but they're definitely involved in that market. I think he's the individual player that they'd be most comfortable getting uncomfortable with. My read is that they don't want to get totally uncomfortable with like the Bichette's of the world. The Cody Bellinger reunion has already been rumored. My concern is more if you get into bidding wars, say on Bregman with the Red Sox or on Bellinger with the Mets. Are the Cubs actually willing to go to the cost intervals that will be necessary if the Red Sox are ponying up money or Steve Cohen is ponying up money to challenge them on a guy like Bellinger? So that's where the brain comes in and goes, how aggressive will they actually be? You know, like, do you want Seiya Suzuki playing 150 games in right field, which is something they tried to move off a couple seasons ago? They didn't like him out there in right field. Now, he played great. I thought he looked really good out there last year in right field. So perhaps some optimism in that respect. But there's definitely some other move in here that I think makes this team a lot better. Cabrera makes sense in a sequence of moves to me. Alone, if this is kind of the last thing they do, I won't say it's a curious move, but it doesn't make the team like, it doesn't give me a ton of confidence that they will absolutely dominate the Brewers and outwin them by like 6 games, you know? You had Bregman? Yeah, totally. We're talking. Like, I'm pretty confident this team's going to win the division.
All right, Lance, I've seen you on Marquee. I'm just going to make a comment.
Let me hear it.
The Cubs are a big market. Can you say the Cubs are a big market just so that people that watch Marquee know the Cubs are a big market?
They are. They're a huge market. It's one of the biggest, probably 4 or 5 in baseball.
Great. Perfect. Thank you for saying that. Let's get back to the trade. They picked up this Edward Cabrera. There's a lot of uncertainty with it. There's a lot of uncertainty with prospects. Owen Caissie was talked about other off seasons like, nobody's touching Owen Caissie. Well, the Marlins got it. The Marlins got him. Is it a case that it's what had to get the job done? Is it a case of we saw what he did in the big leagues and now we're like, okay, we're fine with Seiya Suzuki doing what he does in the outfield? Like, where does that go and what are they giving up in this deal?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Owen Caissie. He's a guy that we actually went down to Myrtle Beach and talked to first when he came into the organization from the Yu Darvish trade. I think he's a really cerebral dude. He really has an understanding of what his body does well from a batted ball standpoint, and he absolutely crushes the baseball from an exit velocity standpoint. And I think that's really what the Marlins are getting. He's a guy that I'm curious to see how much they let him face left-handed pitching. He didn't do that too much in the minors, and I imagine if you kept him on the Cubs for this coming season, he would get the Michael Busch treatment where he really wouldn't face a lot of lefties at all. But I thought he made a lot of sense from like you're not getting Kyle Tucker back, so you know maybe you have Kyle Tucker in the aggregate in right field, you know, with Owen Caissie and another platoon right-handed bat to face left-handed pitching. Partially because Caissie has the thump. He does not have the level of like low K rate discipline that a guy like Tucker does, but I like Caissie a lot. I think he will be an impact bat for the Marlins in some capacity, whether that's in a year or two, you know, we'll see. But I agree. Like, this was a name that I had heard, like we heard last offseason in rumors that this was a guy that the Marlins were interested in. And I think that's been mostly confirmed by a variety of Cub beat writers and Marlin beat writers in the last 24 hours. I'm most curious on like who changed with this trade from a value perspective. You go back to the last deadline, Cubs were in conversation with the Marlins about Edward Cabrera. And it seems like perhaps the piece that the Cubs weren't willing to give up in a lot of negotiations was Jackson Wiggins. This is one of their only pitching prospects, really. They're very depleted in that respect. But he was the guy that I think they were very hesitant to give up. But the Marlins, I know, very much wanted. So I wonder whether the package at the deadline centered more around Wiggins and now it's flipped to Caissie, despite the fact I've heard that Caissie was kind of the name the whole time. But my speculation is more everyone was trying to get Wiggins. They couldn't. Now you have, you know, this injury stuff lurking around Cabrera that pushed some other teams off him, from my understanding. and the Cubs give up Caissie. So perhaps the cost was higher at the deadline, and the Cubs perhaps think they got a deal in this respect, giving up Caissie for him.
You mentioned Cubs pitching development. We're going to get to some pitching development just across the league because I think your stuff is electric on pitching development. But anyway, Kyle Tucker, you got to watch him every single day in his 1 year with the Cubs. And now he's still lingering out on the free agency market. What did you see? And as going forward, what does that look like for other teams that are going to pick somebody up that in Kyle Tucker, 8-year contract, probably over $200 million. What did you see day in and day out from him?
He's an electric bat. I think he does a couple things that you guys obviously from the hitting standpoint can point out better than me, but he has a really interesting, if you look at like the side angle of his swing, how he like lays back his hands and how flat his back gets right like into his load and stuff, allows him to catch balls pretty deep and still lift them. So if you really want to get nerdy, like balls close to his body and close to the back of the plate, he can lift and also hit hard. So I guess this is a weird way to say like he can almost like delay his reaction time a lot. And you could maybe say a lot of guys in baseball do this, but if you look at the list of guys who actually lift those balls deep, it's like Kerry Carpenter and Shohei Ohtani, Paul Goldschmidt. Like it's all very, very good hitters. So no one needs me to tell you that you can validate the fact he's an amazing hitter. Now, is he a quiet dude? You know, yeah. Like I had a couple conversations with him. I enjoyed my convos with him. I thought he was super insightful and stuff. But you know, he's not the clubhouse leader from like an Ian Happ or Dansby Swanson or Nico Horner standpoint, who like those guys have energy and they lead the clubhouse. He's a guy that was the best player on this team from an offensive standpoint last season. And yet I wouldn't say he like carries the torch as though in the clubhouse he is the alpha, you know what I mean? And I'm not knocking him for that. Like he's not going to change his personality, you know, like he is who he is. So I think another team would be getting a guy who's going to be a very good hitter. As to whether he fits, as you guys were talking about in New York before I popped on here, it's a great question. Chicago is, in fact, very different from a media standpoint than New York. I grew up on the East Coast. I very much can attest to that. But yeah, I personally think he fits with the Dodgers the most because he will not get a lot of media requests on that team, right? Like people go into that clubhouse and you want to talk to Ohtani and Freeman and Betts and everybody else probably before you go to Kyle Tucker, and maybe that helps him kind of settle in. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be like the alpha rah-rah guy in the clubhouse, but I don't know how much you like knock the profile and how much you're giving him from a monetary standpoint, given that, because he's a great hitter. And I don't think there's any stats that could kind of back up he's not a great hitter. The down months he had last season were all injury based and he played through them partially because, yeah, he was going into a contract year. Of course, I would play through things too. I want my agent, Casey Close at Excel to head to the market and go, like, this guy played 150 plus games. Like, look at, you want him on your team. You don't want him to be like, oh, he sat out 2 months. You know, he only played 100. And then people are like, well, 2 seasons in a row, he didn't play a lot of games. So, you know, we see in contract years, guys play through small injuries, and it's because the player incentive matters. And I totally understand that.
Let me ask you this. Do you think a guy like Kyle Tucker would want to go to New York? And like, do you think he would want to be that star all of a sudden changing venues from Chicago to New York? You think he would want to go there?
I don't know him well enough to say yes or no. My gut says no. I just think it makes more sense for him to go to a team where he's not getting hounded by the New York media when he's playing through like a broken hand or something like that or whatnot. So, I mean, that's just my pure gut. I don't know him well enough to opine, I'd say, on that specific question. But I think wherever he goes, he's going to hit. And I really think that's what everybody's paying for. And
one more question with the Mets along that line. Do you think the Mets officials saying they're an 87-win team right now, do you see that happening or no?
I haven't looked too much at pure win total projections. I do think, I will say, like, as a concept, we get a bit caught up with win total projections, partially because baseball is like very random in a lot of respects. So if you're projecting a team to win like 87 games, you could usually add like a 6-win variance on that. So if that team wins 81 or 93, which I imagine to you guys is like a massive difference, right? Like if you're leaving the clubhouse on the last day of the season with an 81 win team versus a 93 win team, like you're a very different tenor, I imagine, among the team. But because of how things are sequenced and runs are scored, like variance is huge, you know? So I could see them being an 87-ish, 88 win team. Yeah, I mean, I think they're in that window. Maybe it's more 85-6. And again, if they win 80 or they win 92, that's within like the range of probables, such that you're not going, oh my God, this team insanely overperformed. So I think win totals are tough. I often like giving ranges, but I know it just throws out more numbers. And sometimes people are like a little hesitant to be like, why are you giving me 3 win totals? I want 1. So I get it from like a marketing standpoint. I just say like projections are a range of outcomes a lot of the time, and I think we get caught up in singular numbers a lot.
All right, I want you to get into some pitching development for us here. I want you, because you feel like the Mets are doing a really good job. I think you mentioned the Nats and a couple other teams are doing a really good. What are you looking at? And then what are some of the teams also that are doing a great job of the pitching development in the big leagues right now?
Yeah, I'd say one of the main things I look at, which isn't totally public info, which is why I think I've created a bit of a niche in this, is aggregated minor league data. Major league, totally, that's what matters. That's what you're getting paid for. That's what Cohen wants at the end of the day, that matters. But I think because the samples are often smaller and because you have a lot more monetary involvement from we're going to pay this guy, and perhaps that suggests what a team values, I like looking at aggregated minor league data. So give me A ball to AAA, combine everything together, and let me look at what a team is doing from a usage standpoint, velocity standpoint, results standpoint. A lot of the time that to me indicates what their models internally are biased towards. So look at a team like the Mariners, for example. They have one of the lowest release points in the minor leagues. They really prefer this low sinker slider slot. You look at a team on the inverse side of that. For example, the Dodgers and the Rays are in the same sphere, where they prefer the more hoppy fastball, get in zone a lot, throw really hard, not really large mixes, really focus on four-seam slider early. The Mets, I think, have struck a really interesting balance here, where if you compare their results from 2023 to now, they've shot up considerably. And this is a direct byproduct, I think, of the individuals they brought in, particularly Eric Yeagers and a bunch of other people. They made John DeRuin from Arizona is a guy they brought in as a coordinator. He's incredibly sharp. They brought in Justin Willard from the Red Sox. They know what they're doing on the personnel side, and they've combined that with a couple of years now of really good development in the minors. They have a ton of arms. We saw them trade from the depth of their arms in a couple of these moves they've made, particularly the Ryan Helsley one jumps out to me. And they do a great job. And I think they're really good in understanding seam effects and how the ball interacts with the air and getting guys to shapes that will make them successful. And as a result of that, you're running into the Noah McClains, the Brandon Sproats of the world, these guys who have really deep mixes, throw hard, really good breaking ball shapes, have the weapons to get lefties and righties out overall. And here's what I'm talking about. You go back to 2023, this team was basically dead average. That was right around the time that Yeagers came in. And you jump to 2025 now, and this team, from an underlying standpoint, so I'm looking at four-seam velo, K- walk, and zone width. I'm not really looking at results because a lot of the time minor league parks will influence results pretty heavily, such that you're not really able to get the best indication of the skills occurring with the pitchers. But K- walks, I think, a great one. They're prizing velo, and they're getting a lot of zone whiff. So I really like what they're doing. To me, right now, they are the number one team from a pitching development standpoint. And I don't know how many people agree with me. I think I've heard some in the industry nod their head and say, yeah, they have to at least be top 3 or 5. But I do think a team like the Dodgers has fallen off a bit. They had the highest walk rate in the minor leagues last year. And I think if you talk to people there, they'll attribute it to injury. Their angle is I've heard the golf metaphor of just hit it really far and then we'll eventually get it on the runway for you, which I understand. They're taking big risks. I think they have a very different approach to pitching development because they could go out and pay a starter $30 million. They don't need to develop the fifth starter. There's no need for that basically in the organization based on the amount of money that they're able to spend. So they're the ones that jump out to me. And I know I'm going long here, but there's also on this concept of personnel, a lot of teams, I made a YouTube video about this. There's a lot of teams that have changed personnel, Nationals, Rockies, Athletics, Cardinals, and are pitching minded or the teams that I'd say back in that 2023 area, we thought of as deficient on the pitching development side and are now on the uptrend. So we're getting to a point where a lot of teams are catching up on the pitching side, which makes me very interested to see what the future looks like. What's the next development? In 5 years, what team is the best and why? And that's something I'm thinking through a lot right now.
I'll tell you exactly what team's going to be the best. The team that figures out the health of pitching. Health of pitching. If you raise your organizational velocity by, I don't know what percentage that is, but you went from 15th to 3rd, but your health declines, is that a negative from a pitching development standpoint? Because you're in on it. Is that a negative? And should teams and can teams figure out how to keep that health? Because to me, that's the holy grail of pitching development.
I agree with you. I think that my theory right now is what we see is velocity continues to climb and injury rates either stagnate or slightly decrease, which I would argue is a positive trend overall for the league. If you can pump velo up, and that's the strongest correlation we have to UCLs popping and all these injuries and such, but you can maintain the injury rate or drop it ever so slightly, that is an overall positive to me. From an individual team standpoint, if you push velo up and the injury rate spikes, that's a great question. I think a lot of people publicly would say it's not good. I know a lot of people internally that say that is literally the risk necessary in order to create major league level arms. The goal of pitching departments is not to keep people healthy. It's to create major league starting pitchers. And what are major league starting pitchers right now? They throw really hard with massive breaking balls and have deep mixes. So there's any correlation between what I just said alongside the injury route. I think personally there are a lot of teams that would be comfortable with a small spike or even a relative spike in injury risk if you can then convince your front office that your team created the possibility of major league starters, or increase, the possibility of having more major league starters. And they'll never tell you this. Like, teams are never going to tell you, like, our goal is, we're totally going to make sure all these guys are healthy. Like, that goes entirely against the current incentives we have in the game, which are to throw hard, to have nasty stuff. But this is the topic I've been thinking about a ton, and I'm fascinated to see how teams address it over the next couple of years. And I would love to see guys throwing more in the minors. I think it is a bit counterintuitive what we're seeing from like a babying guys in the minors standpoint. And you hear this from sharp people as well. And this is also like a relatively old school concept of like guys need to be worked up more in the minors to then have success in the major leagues. I think we're getting to a point, perhaps it's going to take like a league incentive where maybe they cut the schedule by like 7 or 8 games. There's less games and there's roster limits, and they limit some of this piggybacking from AAA to the majors, where teams are literally forced to figure out how to get this guy to go deeper into games. And maybe that creates a subtle drop in velocity, but I guarantee you if that velocity goes down and teams figure it out, it's just going to go right back up, because velocity for the most part is one of the strongest predictors of success.